minutes tops.
Okay.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Theology Thursdays. This is a part of our new virtual e-series, Day by Day. My name is Reverend Landon Adams. I'm the director for the Maturity Department at New Salem Church in Columbus, Ohio. For our first guest this week, we've got our very own Pastor Troy, Dr. Keith Allen Troy, who has been the pastor now of New Salem almost 37 years. Pastor, good to have you on today. How are you, sir?
Good morning, sir. I'm doing fine, like everybody else, trying to handle these challenging times. But, with God, we're going to make it and things are going to work out.
Indeed, indeed. Well, again, it's good to have you on this first series. This Theology Thursdays series is really just meant to expose people both to what theology is, why it's important, and also to dig in deeper to some theological themes and topics that are important to us and to the church. So this first episode is really about just why theology is important. So we thought it was important that our pastor come on and be able to talk about why it's important to him, why it's important to the church, and then what we think we can get out of this series overall. Pastor, for those who may be new to New Salem, who are joining us in this virtual world, give us a little background about yourself, how you grew up, how you came to be in the ministry, and what New Salem has been like for 37 years.
Well, I am the second son of Leon and Bernice Troy. My father was a Baptist preacher, and I have 3 living brothers. So I grew up in the pastor's house and in the parsonage. I certainly did not want to do what I am doing. This was not my choice, but obviously it was God's choice and call. So in my sophomore year at Morehouse, I came to grips with this call and finally yielded to that and have been blessed to be able to now pastor New Salem for 36 plus years. I am married to Brenda Patterson Troy, and we are the proud parents of 5 children and 7 grandchildren. New Salem has been very impactful in my life, having gone there when the church was a very small congregation, primarily made up of senior citizens. And I was working full-time at the Ohio State. And so God allowed me to be bivocational for a while. And in 2.5 years in, we began experiencing tremendous growth and had to make the decision to leave the university and come to the church full-time. And based upon that faith decision, God began to grow us beyond our understanding and belief. And we now are blessed to have moved to a different sanctuary, larger congregation, which has made us far more dependable on God than we were in the first place in terms of that. But it's been a love affair with them, and I am pleased that God's allowed me to serve these people, and as we have tried to grow together.
Indeed, indeed. It's a beautiful story of pastor and people. Can you talk a little bit about, as we think about this series, theology, why is theology important to you? We use a kind of framework that theology is the intellectual or thinking about our faith. Growing up as a PK and in the church, did you always experience faith as a place where you could use your mind, be critical, or when did you kind of discover what theology was and why is that important?
I think for me, theology provided that ability to intersect the emotion and the intellect and not have to apologize for it. Like I said, I grew up in the church all my life, saw a lot of emotion expressed and developed, but I really wanted to know when I had the questions that I had and those kind of issues and concerns, where could I ask them? And was I the only person having those questions? Yeah. Because I didn't just take it at faith value just because the Sunday school teacher said so, or my father said so, or the Bible said so. I'm like, yeah, I hear all of that. But some of this just doesn't make sense to me. And so in my first year at Colgate Rochester, Dr. Lewis Charles Harvey was the systematic theology teacher and professor and became my advisor and really made theology come alive for me and really helped me understand I didn't have to check my brain at the church or play it down. I could ask those questions and wrestle with those questions which gave me a deeper understanding of my relationship with God, which kind of, for me, orchestrated the intellect and the practical. I always tell people I'm a pragmatist by choice, and I'm fine with the intellectual discussions in that, but how do we help the people we serve Monday through Saturday? So for me, theology began to be that basis of which I could base my decisions on, and always going back saying, this is not totally based upon me, but what is God saying? What is his word saying? And how do I interact with this sometimes conflict between my emotions and my brain, and let God work that thing out and say, you know, just because you're thinking it or feeling it, one does not discount the other. So for me, I always will be thankful to Dr. Harvey for really kind of letting me say, okay, I don't have to check my brain or I don't have to check my heart. The two can exist together.
Oh, good. I remember Dr. William Turner, who was my seminary preaching professor, used to say, you can have the learning and the burning.
And the burning, yes, sir. Yeah, yeah. Very true.
He came out of the United Holiness Church and had plenty of burning.
Sure. Yeah.
But both their denomination, and I think a lot of churches suffer from the notion that your calling, both as a minister or your engagement with the church, is purely emotional or purely spiritual, and doesn't come with that intellectual engagement or learning part.
I would agree, and I think that's part of the challenge that we even have today, that it's one or the other and not both. And when you line both of those up, they feed each other.
Yeah.
You know, so my heart feeds my mind and my mind feeds my heart, because again, my memory is a friend to my faith. And the more I think about what God has done in my life and how he's lined those things out, the more that turns the flame and the fires up in my spirit and the reflections and those kinds of things. So I don't know how you don't have both of those.
Yeah, good. How have you seen theology from a pastoral perspective, even preaching perspective, played out in the church? It's one thing for us to have our personal devotion and Bible study and to have what sometimes can seem ridiculous questions or critical engagement with God. But how does that play out in the church, and why is it important for the local church?
I think for me, the challenge that God's always placed in front of me at New Salem is, how do I take a traditional church, turn it into a relevant church without tearing it up? And so part of this whole dynamic between my mind and my heart is, how do I take the theology I've been blessed to learn and live with and make it practical in the pew for folk every day who may not have had the privilege of going to school or studying it or whatever. So I think instead of making the simple complex, our job is to take the complex and make it simple and give people a framework to work through that, and also give them permission to ask the questions, to deal with the questions, and sometimes even say to them, I don't have the answer to this, and it's okay. And I think when we can admit those things, but we can struggle through this thing together as we pour into each other. And I don't think it's one way. I think it's a conversation between pulpit and pew. And when we're allowed to do that, then I think wherever you find yourself on this situation, you don't have to check out or check in based upon that time of the service.
Good. Can you think this? Of course, we prepped with questions, but do you have a favorite theological theme, topic, word of yours that this is, if you want to talk about this theological issue, this is always the one you'd be ready to talk about?
I think for me, I always say, what's your heart? It's transformation. The fact that Jesus Christ and God can accept me with all my faults and flaws and failures. And through the power of the blood and death and burial and resurrection, I can be transformed into who he wants me to be. That always blows my mind. So no matter what state I find myself in, God has transforming power to take me beyond even my own expectations in terms of that. And the fact that I know God has forgiven me and loves me gets me through those times when I don't feel forgiven and I don't feel loved. So transformation would be my word.
Amen. Beautiful. Well, as we wrap up this first series of our Theology Thursdays and why theology is important, any thoughts for you as the pastor and hopes for this series and what folks in the congregation and others might be able to get out of it?
I hope for our congregation and even those who tune in, it will allow them to wrestle with their theological issues, the questions and the answers and those kind of things, but it pushes us a little bit more into the thinking part of what we do. Don't get me wrong, I love the emotive part, but I don't want our folks to have to check their brains at the door simply because they think that's what we do. God can handle any question that we have.
Amen.
We just need to be prepared for the answer. So I challenge our folks to wrestle with those theological questions that don't make sense, that don't line up. And God in his own time and through your own experience will answer all those challenges. And he will deepen your faith through that.
That's for sure. Well, Pastor, thanks so much for taking some time out with us today. Again, you can look for us every Thursday for these Thursday Theology Moments. Reverend Landon Adams with the Maturity Department in New Salem and Dr. Keith Choi has been our guest this morning. If you are around on Sundays at 11, come back to our YouTube channel and join us for virtual worship. We'd love to have you as a part of our community. Thanks again, and God bless.
Thank you. Take care, bro.